So thank you very much to be here. As you mentioned, trust is the cornerstone of everything in politics, in business, in any kind of technological activity. Even our currency, in French, we say monnaie fiduciaire. It comes from fides, faith. So it shows how everything is based in trust. But actually, I would say that even in ethical or legal frameworks, many characteristics are applied to AI: safety, explainability, but also trustworthiness. And perhaps trustworthiness is the most complex to define. So we have the chance to have today those distinguished panelists, and I would start perhaps by you, John, asking you a very one-on-one question. For you, what's a trustworthy AI?
That's a one-on-one question. I think it's going to be a tough panel.
Close to the mic.
I think when we start to look at trustworthy AI, we need to look at the entire surrounding of the use of these tools. When we talk about the tools, I think about the AI principles that we've initiated within Microsoft around this idea of fairness, making sure there's no unintended bias within the tools, safety and reliability, that the tools respond in a safe way and are reliable, that they're secure and private, that they address the new security and privacy concerns and considerations, that they're inclusive, that they help people that have adaptive technologies or adaptive needs, address accountability and transparency across the board. Now, these aren't new principles. We put them in place 7 years ago, before generative AI. We've seen other nationalities and other nations use these principles. The OECD has similar principles. The National Institute of Standards and Technology has similar principles. So these principles have proven to be durable across the board. But then part of that also goes into your organization's heritage and how do they appear before your consumers or your constituents. And so you need to have that trust built in there as well, that you're doing the right thing, that you're responding to crisis in an appropriate way. And I'm quite fortunate that Microsoft has recently finished 6th in the Canadian Trust Index as a trustworthy organization, and that comes not only from the business practices, but how do you respond when things go wrong, and being able then to make things right again. And so that's an important part of this too, that process and that communication.
Thank you very much. But as you say, safety can be built by design in a technology, but trust, you need to build it, and it's partly in the mind of the users. It's not only in the technology. So the other ones, according to your experience, what helps to build this trust? Yeah, for example, Amanda.
So I think that particularly, for us and what we're looking at in Texas and deploying this technology across the state, it's not, to your point, and the points that are made, is trust is not necessarily a tangible thing. How you build trust, how you keep that trust, it's far more nebulous. It's something that can be a lot more difficult to attain. But particularly in the government space, it's imperative. I mean, trust is absolutely imperative for us. We know certainly, in the United States, and you see recent polls that, trust in government is at an all-time low. And so we really feel it's one of our duties in state government to make sure that we're not lowering that trust and that we're in fact only increasing it. And so one of the things that we have that's a kind of a guiding principle on any technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, blockchain, anything new, whatever the new thing, the new shiny technology is going to be that comes down the road, is being deliberate, being intentional, sometimes even being a little bit slow to deploy is not necessarily a bad thing, because what we know is our residents, our taxpayers, they're okay with us being slow if it means that we're being intentional and that thoughtful about the deployment of technologies, because the reality is, in many ways, government is a monopoly. You don't really have a choice necessarily when you're dealing with a government. We're going to take your data, you have to interact with us in order to conduct your business, your daily lives, all of those things. And so therefore, the burden on us to maintain the trust and make sure whatever we're deploying is safe, secure, all of those variety of things that I know we'll talk about more. It's just paramount. And so for us, the perspective is a little different than deploying these technologies that it would be in the private sector.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you're touching a very key point is you can choose your provider, but you cannot choose your state and your administration. So it probably it gives a very high expectation from the citizens and a lot of responsibilities. And so, General, that's the same for the army and the police. I mean, people do not choose them, and so you have also a lot of responsibilities, including the fact that you're dealing with a national security, so it's even more key. Question en français, puisque vous représentez, non pas comme on l'avait dit à un moment, la gendarmerie royale, mais la gendarmerie nationale en France. Comment est-ce que vous avez fait, vous qui avez à la fois travaillé sur la stratégie de mise en œuvre de l'intelligence artificielle et aussi sur le code de conduite éthique? Comment est-ce que vous avez fait en sorte qu'en interne au sein des équipes et en externe vis-à-vis des utilisateurs, des citoyens, l'utilisation de l'intelligence artificielle par la gendarmerie nationale soit bien acceptée?
Alors c'est effectivement un enjeu fondamental. I'm going to speak in French because I'm the only guy from France. C'est un enjeu essentiel, effectivement, cette notion de confiance, et c'est un enjeu difficile, parce que la confiance, ce n'est pas une certitude absolue, ce n'est pas binaire, la confiance. La confiance se perd très vite. Donc, on a, en tant que force étatique, on n'est pas une entreprise. Ce qui veut dire que, vis-à-vis du citoyen, on a un devoir qui va au-delà du produit qu'on va fournir. On a un devoir de redevabilité, on a un devoir de responsabilité. Ce qui veut dire qu'en termes de confiance, nous, ce qu'on a mis en place, c'est une vision globale par rapport à l'utilisation de nos systèmes d'intelligence artificielle. Cette vision globale, c'est quoi? C'est déjà former nos personnels. Parce que avoir confiance dans l'IA, c'est bien, mais si on a des personnels qui ne savent pas l'utiliser, je pense qu'on peut très vite perdre la confiance. C'est s'engager dans la voie de l'éthique. Vous l'avez souligné, Eric. On a publié une charte éthique il y a de ça 3 ans maintenant. Cette charte éthique rentre dans les valeurs de l'institution de la gendarmerie nationale. Et comme on le soulignait, c'est marrant, on s'était retrouvés avant que cette charte éthique ne soit écrite. J'étais allé voir Eric pour échanger et on s'était posé la question de cette charte éthique. Et Eric me disait, mais l'éthique, c'est une affaire de professionnels. Tout le monde parle d'éthique. Et en fait, c'est une affaire de professionnels. Donc on a fait appel à des philosophes pour nous aider à construire effectivement cette charte éthique qui est aujourd'hui publique et accessible. L'autre volet, c'est le travail sur la réglementation. Il est essentiel pour nous de travailler sur la réglementation. L'AI Act vient d'être mis en œuvre. Il faut qu'on soit partie prenante dans cette réglementation, de façon, là aussi, vis-à-vis du citoyen, montrer que les outils qu'on a entrent dans la réglementation qui nous est imposée. Et en termes de redevabilité, on doit protéger le citoyen, à la fois dans sa dimension individuelle, protéger les libertés individuelles, mais on doit aussi protéger le citoyen dans son modèle de vie collective, c'est-à-dire le modèle de société démocratique. Et donc, on doit ajuster ce point d'équilibre. Et pour faire ça, on travaille sur l'évolution de la menace par des travaux de recherche, par des travaux de développement en interne, de façon à avoir toute la maîtrise de notre produit. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'on ne va pas acheter des solutions à l'externe, mais on veut maîtriser nos produits. Et ça, c'est aussi un élément, à mon avis, qui participe à la confiance. Donc, vous voyez, la confiance pour une force étatique, elle ne se fonde pas simplement sur le produit d'IA, elle se fonde sur tout un environnement qui accompagne le produit et qu'on délivre effectivement au profit de la protection des citoyens.
Donc, formation, souveraineté. Amanda, how do you do that in Texas? You deal also with education and technology and innovation. Do you have some insight on that, on the way you use those tools to enforce and to increase the level of trust in the technology?
Sorry, was that a question for me? There was a delay.
Yeah,
on the education piece, yes. So one of the things that we've done in Texas, because again, and I'll go back to this, we're talking today about AI, particularly generative AI. It could be any new technology, but it's the education space and trying to make sure not only the public that they understand what they're working with, but more importantly, our workforce and state government, and they understand these tools. So we started with an AI user group that was a totally voluntary group that any entity or any folks in the people in the public sector could join. We currently have more than 600 members since its inception, and these are more than 600 people across the public sector in Texas who come together for conversations, for classes, to share policies, to share best practices, to talk about the technology, and really importantly, to be able to learn from the technology. We also, at the state of Texas, created what we call an innovation lab. We're calling the Texas Innovation and Education Center, and it's a physical space, a lab space where the public sector employees can come in and try new technologies. As we say, try it around, kick the tires, see if you like it, take it for a test drive, if you will. But it's in a secure space. It's like it's a sandbox where you know that you can do this and safely deploy the technologies to see if this is something that would be right for your agencies. And part of this is building. It came years ago. We started, I think it was in 2019, an Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence. And that was the first part of the education piece around for our workforce to start introducing these new technologies and making sure that they were ready to adopt and deploy these safely in our environment. We've had a lot of adoption and a lot of success, and this has also been really helpful to us as a connection with the vendor community, because we're opening up our doors to let them know that we want to learn about your products. We want you to we've done something with Microsoft around Copilot, and we're doing a lot of different pilots with our agencies to really try to find those use cases. We have a saying that goes around, and I don't think it's unique to us in Texas, is that in government, nobody wants to be first, but nobody wants to be last. And so it's really important to have these secure places where our government entities can try out the technologies and make sure that it's the right fit for their organization and their mission.
Thank you very much.
If I could jump in, this idea of trust and education is critically important. In Canada, we lag the G7 in trust in AI. So much so, we just did a recent survey, Microsoft and Accenture, and found that Canadians have a distrust in AI of only 31% of Canadians trust AI, and that's 23 points lower than the next organization or next nation. And when we ask Canadians if they feel confident in describing what AI is, how many percentage do you think are confident in describing what AI is? 4% of Canadians are comfortable describing what AI is. And yet, if I ask you if you used a mapping application to find out where to go today, you'll say yes. If you used a thumbprint to open up your phone, you'd say yes. Autocomplete, voice to text, spell check, grammar check. We've been using AI all along, and so it's important that we help educate individuals that AI is not the scary monster, that AI can help us in all these many ways, and that there's different types of AI, and that comes through education and helps build trust. Thanks for letting me interject.
Yeah, so a lot of hidden AI. So Simon, you wanted to
Yeah,
jump in?
I'm going to jump in here just a little bit as the cybersecurity practitioner here. So we're talking about trust, and as a consumer of AI, I'm more concerned about the outputs, what the AI is giving as an output. So do I trust the output? Because I have to trust that the model is secure. I have to trust that the inputs that I'm putting in are secure. I have to trust that the data is secure, that it's being trained on. So is trust security, or security about AI the trust model? I think that's kind of my angle right now and what we're dealing with. I love the ethics. I love the value. But I mean, let's face it, some of the data that most of the data that these models are being trained on has been generated by humans with bias. So the outputs are going to be naturally biased. At some point, yes, we'll have AI-generated content, but who's to say that that's not going to be bias impacted as well? So I think trust is heavily dependent on security as well.
Yeah, Général,
Oui, alors je voulais intervenir sur l'éducation, mais peut-être un mot sur la confiance, où ça rejoint ce qui a été dit. Je crois qu'en termes de confiance, ce qu'il faut, c'est que le système réponde à des finalités et qu'on fasse en sorte que tout le process soit garanti par rapport aux finalités obtenues. Effectivement, il y aura des biais, mais dans toutes les données, il y a des biais. C'est illusoire de parler de données sans biais. C'est illusoire de parler d'humains sans biais. Les humains sans biais, ce sont des clones. Donc moi, je ne veux pas vivre dans une société de clones. Il faut aussi accepter qu'on ait des biais, qu'on ait des différences. Et l'IA reflètera ça aussi. Ce sur quoi on travaille, nous, c'est les biais qui portent préjudice d'un point de vue discriminatoire. Et ça, c'est important, effectivement, de le garantir vis-à-vis de la population. Et je voudrais, quand j'entendais parler d'éducation, rajouter un point qui est essentiel, parce qu'on a mis depuis peu en place ce qu'on appelle des cafés bleus de l'IA. Le gouvernement a lancé l'initiative des cafés de l'IA, c'est-à-dire on va vers le citoyen pour expliquer notre démarche en matière d'intelligence artificielle. On organise ces cafés bleus parce que notre uniforme est bleu pour parler de l'IA dans le champ de la sécurité intérieure. L'objectif, c'est quoi? On parle pendant 15 à 20 minutes, mais surtout, on répond aux questions des citoyens. Parce que le citoyen, ça a été dit tout à l'heure, mais quand on est entre spécialistes, c'est pas très difficile de parler d'IA, mais on a trop tendance à parler qu'entre nous. Et je crois qu'il est important d'aller vers les personnes qui ne savent pas ce qu'est l'intelligence artificielle et de leur expliquer, on n'est pas Big Brother, on n'est pas là pour vous surveiller, on est là pour vous protéger. Et ce n'est pas un vain mot, c'est vraiment une réalité. Le gendarme, dans son quotidien, il protège les gens. Moi, j'ai quelques années de carrière derrière moi. Quand j'ai surveillé les personnes, c'était dans un cadre judiciaire, ce n'était pas dans un cadre administratif. Donc il y avait une autorisation du magistrat. Donc tout ça, il faut l'expliquer et je crois que cette pédagogie est essentielle pour là aussi acquérir de la confiance.
Mais alors, justement, John, quand on préparait, vous parliez un petit peu de shadow AI. C'est tous ces gens qui utilisent des systèmes, quelque part, ça veut dire que quelque part, ils font confiance à l'IA, mais à l'IA telle que eux la maîtrisent. Et ils bypassent un peu les systèmes qui sont utilisés par les entreprises ou par les institutions. Ça, c'est quand même un peu une forme de manque de confiance. Comment est-ce que vous pensez qu'on peut recréer la confiance dans les systèmes qui sont plus officiels, souvent aussi plus sûrs et probablement mieux designés pour leur usage que de mettre tout dans, je ne sais pas, un chat GPT quelconque ou un système quelconque public?
Yes. Shadow AI, yeah. If we don't roll out AI across enterprise like networks, it's going to happen. People are going to export information out of the sandbox, so to speak, do what they need to do, and then reintegrate it back into the sandbox. And who knows what they're reintegrating that data with, and who knows where that data outside of the sandbox is going. So that is a problem. And that's probably what we're going to be talking about next is pace, really, and how quickly we can implement safe and secure AI, trustworthy AI across enterprise environments, add in the learning piece so that people know how to use it, know that it's not Google search, it's prompt, correctly engineered questions to engage in the AI, because sometimes it's difficult to ask the AI to do something. You think you're asking it the right question, it thinks it's giving you the right output, and you're like, that's not what I wanted. So it's going to take a little bit of a learning curve for all of us to learn how to correctly speak and interface with AI. So get it out, get it in the systems, inside the sandboxes, secure and safe, trustworthy.
Thank you very much. We are speaking about safety of AI, but AI also challenges all the safety ecosystem. So can you build a little bit
Absolutely.
about that?
So I usually phrase it into the 3 Ps. So there's pace, there's people, and there's policy, and we can talk policy as governance as well. So when I talk about pace, we know AI is fast, it's coming. People want to incorporate it into business functions because they see the value of it to speed up processes and to streamline everything. But are they doing it are they incurring technical debt? And what I mean by technical debt is that they're implementing solutions that are going to outpace the ability of those supporting the solutions, and they're incurring this technical debt. So at the end of 2 or 3 years, they're going to be in a situation where the model or the AI solution is just not supportable. So that's one piece about technical debt. The other piece is, through the Cyber Center, we're seeing that even just normal cyber hygiene, organizations are struggling with that as well. Just your simple, like the Cyber Center puts out their top 10 cybersecurity recommendations. You know, administration privileges. Why does everybody have that? Why, just because I'm a developer, I don't need admin privileges. You know, multi-factor authentication. These are simple things that a lot of us or a lot of organizations are still struggling with. The people aspect of it, we're all competing for the same talent out there. So retention, hiring, recruitment is a challenge for all of us. And I've been speaking to Dr. Bengio, and I said, how do we bring in this young talent? Because you know, are they looking for that big, you know, triple salary figure? No, he said they want purpose, and they're not going to spend a career in the organization. They're going to be bouncing around. So we need to be prepared that the talent that we bring in is not going to be staying within the organization. As much as we try to keep them in, they're going to be looking for the next jump to provide that piece. The other piece on people is, do I hire an AI specialist and then train them on cybersecurity? Or do I hire a cybersecurity specialist and train them on AI? Add to that, I think those learning development pieces need to be core part of the core curriculum. Just like English, math, and whatnot, history per se, we need cybersecurity. We need AI baked in right at the onset so that our next generation coming up, it's going to be something natural for them. And then the last piece, the last P, is the policy. Policymakers, and I'm not a policymaker, need to be able to adapt policy at pace. Accept a little bit of risk that the policy you put out today might have to change or pivot within 6 months, within 12 months. So keeping policy makers adapt at change is going to be another difficult thing, because a lot of the policy we put into place now is expected to last for a number of years before they even relook at it, which is another challenge in itself. And then I think the last piece I'll just add on there, you know, on the governance/policy piece, and we might even talk about it, is, you know, I've heard yesterday, today, secure by design. I think that's probably going to be one of our key staples. Privacy by design, I think, is going to be another staple for that trustworthiness of any AI going forward. And what that means to me is that as we look to implement AI solutions, we're applying the security at the beginning, we're applying the privacy principles right at the beginning, and they're not an afterthought, as in many cases.
Thank you very much. I see that, Amanda, you're acknowledging when we speak about governance and policy. We see that trust is important and trustworthiness for AI. But what's the role and responsibilities of governments, not only in the implementation specifically that you explained already, but also, let's say, in the way they frame the game for also the private sector?
So this is really part of the challenge, I think, with it, and I really like Simon's points there around having policies that can move at the pace of the technology. And that is, I mean, that's a challenge. Now, again, we go back to, I think, that in the government space, and I'm talking about, you know, well, whatever the regulations are, but in the government space, that's a difficult thing. We all know it's difficult enough to pass a law, a statute, in any sort of timely manner, and to try to keep that balance between regulation that's going to prioritize privacy, security, non-bias, all of those things, while still encouraging innovation. And I think the challenge, that is a tough challenge. So in Texas, in particular, our legislature only meets every other year and only for 6 months. So in order for a law to happen, it could take, it's going to be a long time before that legislative session comes around again, before that could be changed. So one of the things that we've tried to do in Texas with technology legislation is to provide a loose framework that then, but granting rulemaking authority to agencies like mine so that we can have things that are a little bit more adaptive with the pace of technology. It's not a perfect system. There's still challenges with it, but we try to do that so we have some more flexibility. But when it comes to I mean, certainly I think the roles and responsibilities around this, we really have to look at, there's multiple factors. So just this week, we got a preview of legislation that's going to be filed in Texas in January. And it's a 41-page bill around AI. And it's looking right now, it's still in a draft form, but it's open for comment. And it's looking at placing responsibility on developers, distributors, and deployers at various levels. Now, when I say it was just released, it was just released. I'm still reading it, so certainly not an expert at this point in time on it, and there's still a lot of opportunity for comment and change. But I think that gives a little bit of a preview around what we're looking at. The other thing that's distinguished in Texas, at least in this particular bill, is it's defining things as high-impact AI systems. And it's also mandating for any of these high-impact systems, you have to keep a human in the loop, which I think, was, again, that's going to go a long way in helping with the trust. So I really love what the General was talking about here about having these community forums when you go out and you answer questions and develop a lot of those and hear opinions from citizens on what it is that AI should be and some of their challenges and questions, because I think that goes in to inform the responsibility. In Texas, we are a very pro-business state. We encourage businesses to come here to do business with Texas. So we really don't like to regulate business a lot. But I think particularly with generative AI and the challenges that it's facing or that it poses, it's going to be a unique process for us, and maybe having to strike out with a little more regulation than we're used to.
Wow, so even Texas wants to regulate.
I know, yeah, hard to believe.
Yeah, but that's interesting. Says how burning the topic is.
Right.
Just to say, in Northern America, John or Simon, how is it managed in Canada? Is it slightly different? Yeah.
So Canada came out to an early lead for governance around AI, and I would point to it the federal government as being a leader in this space about having a directive on automated decision making for many years, as well as an AI impact assessment tool that I believe is now 10 years old. And like as Canadians, we all remember that we have had success in building out regulation that lasts the space of time. I had good fortune to work in the federal government to develop legislation. So the PIPEDA, our privacy legislation, I didn't do the privacy side, I did the Electronic Documents Act side. But if you think about PIPEDA when it got developed in 2002, it was principles based, not technology focused, but talked about the principles and the harms. And if we are to take a similar approach for AI, it's going to stand us in good stead. What are the principles? Fairness, safety, privacy, like all those things. And then what are the harms we're trying to guard against? Because the harms don't change, right? We're trying to respect people's privacy. We're trying to make sure that people aren't discriminated against. And so that'll stand us the test of time to allow these technologies to evolve. What we've seen in Canada is they've taken a very EU-centric approach. And so I've been good fortune in talking with ISED, Innovation, Science, Economic Development, about their legislation. And they are looking to Brussels. So to be quite frank, they want to have alignment with the European Union and their AI and Data Act. But they've added some little tweaks to it. They've talked about high impact systems, but they've not defined them. They've talked about general purpose systems, but they've not defined them. And then they put in criminal penalties for misuse or for malfeasance, but not described what that means. And so it's a challenge for organizations to figure out where they want to go and how they want to deploy these tools. And there's a fear-forward approach. What we've seen over the last 20 months is that organizations have started to put in place AI governance structures despite having used AI for decades. And now we have all these groups looking at even low-sensitive AI. They're looking at spell check. They're looking at like grammar checkers in this AI governance, and it's stalling things. It's stalling deployments, it's stalling application. Because now they've got a big hammer and everything's a nail. And so we're really trying to make sure that people appreciate the different types of AI. And we haven't done a good job of that here at the panel at the beginning, right? There's generative AI that does things like do summarization. Is that an impact in the environment? There's chatbots that can mislead people. Is that something that's sensitive? I can then build my own stuff. Is that sensitive? We need to be able to distinguish between them, because today's AI is now democratized from the wizards in the back room. You might have heard people talk about data quality and data cleanliness around some of these tools. You don't necessarily ask yourself that question when you're using Translate on your web browser, right? And so is that something in the AI? We need to make sure we distinguish between those environments. So what we see then Canada doing is adopting from other places as the legislation seems to have stalled within the government. So the AI and Data Act had much discussion, went through debate, first, second reading, a number of meetings, and then all of a sudden we've hit a tumultuous point in government. And so the progress hasn't been what it should be. And so Canadians are looking to the United States with the voluntary commitment to generative AI. And I actually sit on a committee that I helped form in Innovation, Science, Economic Development Canada called the Canadian Forum for Digital Infrastructure Resilience. And I used to chair the AI and ML working group that was looking at what was involved with deploying and meeting those voluntary commitments. It's now chaired by BlackBerry, which is a great news, and moving that forward. And so that's a key cornerstone. We also are looking towards the ISO standards as well, with the recent publication of 42001, the AI management practice standard. And so for those of you in security, you know 27001 for security, or 27018, 27017, provides a consistent table of contents, consistent reference for organizations looking to do the right thing from an AI governance perspective. And so really looking internationally to put in place the right tools, processes, and frameworks for that trust.
Thank you very much. Simon, do you want to add something?
I think John summed it up quite nicely, what's going on in that space. I'll just add in something more closer to the government of Canada. Mutual trust, or actually mutual risk more so. And what I mean by that is if we're talking governance now, how we apply mutual risk acceptance, if you will, is the Cyber Center as the technical authority on all things cyber, on all things IT. We hold that stick, so to speak, as that technical authority. We have our Treasury Board Secretariat, which is the business owner of the actual operation, and then we have Shared Services Canada, which is our consolidated operations piece. So between the three of us, we call ourselves the tripartite. We accept that mutual risk, and that's how we govern a lot of the new technologies, including AI, that are being implemented across the government of Canada through a number of working groups, through Architecture Review Board, Identity Management, Access Management, but they all filter through the tripartite where we can assess risk and mutually accept it or send it back down for reassessment. And then it goes up the chain that way. So that's how we're tackling that governance model. I think it's, I'm not a big fan of governance, but I think in this case, it's working quite well for us.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Ça, c'est un peu le mindset nord-américain. Mon général, vous êtes dans une situation particulière puisque d'un côté, vous avez travaillé dans le groupe qui a contribué à élaborer le AI Act, donc le texte de l'Union européenne, donc un texte de loi, et en même temps, vous travaillez aussi sur la partie un peu soft law et même, cadre éthique. Comment est-ce que vous articulez les deux, on va dire, entre des obligations légales et puis ces questions éthiques qui peut-être représentent un peu plus les valeurs de l'institution?
Alors, je vais répondre à la question de cette articulation entre réglementation et éthique, mais je voudrais quand même revenir à des propos qui ont été tenus parce que j'ai trouvé extrêmement intéressant. La notion de célérité. C'est vrai qu'il y a une célérité qui est considérable en matière de technologie. En IA, il y a 2 ans, on ne parlait pas de larges modèles de langage, on parlait des métavers, on parlait de tout ça. Et le monde, aujourd'hui, on utilise tous des larges modèles de langage. Donc on voit cette célérité. Et je crois que malheureusement, les gouvernements ne pourront pas, nos politiques ne pourront pas être à la hauteur de cette célérité technologique. Ce serait illusoire de le penser. Ce qui veut dire qu'en termes de réglementation, il faut être capable de construire une réglementation suffisamment générique pour être capable d'anticiper les développements à venir. C'est extrêmement compliqué, donc le travail est devant nous. Et typiquement, la réglementation européenne en matière d'intelligence artificielle, il faut absolument qu'elle soit évolutive. Ça a été dit. Je trouve que l'Europe a fait un beau travail de réglementation sur l'intelligence artificielle, mais peut-être qu'évolutive. On a traité les usages et aux usages, on a associé des risques. Mais typiquement, les larges modèles de langage ont été juste abordés à la fin des travaux et donc pas forcément abordés dans toute leur complexité. Parce que Aujourd'hui, le risque, c'est quoi? Alors, il y a un représentant de Microsoft, mais c'est qu'à un moment, ces big tech imposent leur gouvernance. Et pourquoi? Parce que les États n'auront pas réussi à suivre. Donc ça c'est aussi un risque qu'il faut intégrer. Et je crois qu'il faut travailler ensemble. Et c'est ce que font les big tech. Hein, ils essayent de travailler avec les États. Mais c'est un enjeu quand même de gouvernance qui est essentiel. Et cette gouvernance étatique peut être bousculée. Donc c'est vraiment à nous de savoir où on se place sur ces sujets-là. Et la problématique des données à caractère personnel dans les LLM, je pense que dans la salle, vous utilisez tous des larges modèles de langage. Vous ne vous posez pas la question de l'utilisation des données à caractère personnel. C'est une réalité. Elles sont utilisées. Après, elles sont restituées plus ou moins, mais c'est dans les larges modèles de langage. Nous, on prend des modèles open weight et on les adapte à nos données pour avoir des applications spécifiques. Mais l'open weight, les poids qui ont été mis sur ces modèles, exploitent de la donnée à caractère personnel. Donc c'est vraiment un enjeu essentiel pour les gouvernements. Est-ce qu'on sera capable de protéger cette donnée à caractère personnel pendant les années à venir? C'est pas sûr du tout. Et je crois qu'en avoir conscience et être vigilant sur le sujet. Et ça me paraît essentiel. Alors, je reviens sur la notion d'articulation entre éthique et réglementation. Là aussi, c'est quelque chose d'important. L'AI Act a été fondé sur 7 règles éthiques. Donc, de l'éthique, on est arrivé à la réglementation. La réglementation sanctionne. L'éthique, ça a plus attrait à la philosophie. La réglementation, elle a trait au droit. Donc on est obligé de suivre effectivement cette réglementation. Les principes éthiques, ce sont plutôt des principes, je ne vais pas dire choisis, mais qui correspondent aux valeurs que vous portez. Et donc, nous ce qu'on fait, c'est qu'on veut les deux. C'est-à-dire qu'on veut que nos systèmes répondent à notre code éthique, mais qu'ils soient bien entendu conforme à la réglementation. Donc ça, c'est un enjeu qui est important. Et sur cette réglementation, en Europe, on a été très fiers du RGPD et GDPR, parce qu'effectivement, cette notion de données à caractère personnel, c'est une vraie capacité à protéger le citoyen. Mais il ne faudrait pas penser que l'AI Act, c'est un nouvel RGPD. Si les régulateurs du RGPD sont ceux qui vont réguler l'AI Act, on aura sorti un système d'IA, il faudra 18 mois, 2 mois de traitement juridique avant que le système ne sorte. À la vitesse où va l'IA, on ne sera jamais à l'heure. Et ça pourrait impacter l'innovation. Et ça, c'est un enjeu aussi majeur en matière d'innovation. Aujourd'hui, indépendamment de l'intelligence artificielle, en France, si on veut se mettre en conformité par rapport au RGPD, pour un système, c'est en moyenne 1 an à 18 mois, au plus court. Imaginez dans le domaine de l'IA, où il y aura encore plus de contraintes. Si on est sur ces délais-là, on a 3-4 versions d'un système d'IA qui seront apparues au moment où notre système pourra être mis en place. Donc on courra toujours après le train. Donc ça, c'est un enjeu de flexibilité, un enjeu d'agilité de la réglementation qu'il va falloir faire. Les principes éthiques, je dirais que c'est des principes durables. C'est des principes qui doivent... On n'a pas à les changer tous les 3-4 ans. C'est quelque chose qui doit, dans la profondeur, nous impacter. La réglementation, notamment sur l'intelligence artificielle, elle doit être beaucoup plus agile, beaucoup plus flexible. Et je pense que, en tant que membre du comité expert de l'AI Board au sein de la Commission européenne, on aura un devoir de revoyure tous les 3-4 ans pour effectivement adapter par rapport aux différentes innovations en IA.
3-4 ans, mais vous disiez qu'effectivement, les technologies évoluent tous les 6 mois. Donc la difficulté, c'est de réguler ex ante à l'avance. Je me souviens justement dans un groupe autour de l'intelligence artificielle, quelqu'un citait la réglementation britannique sur les voitures qui disait qu'au 19e siècle, il fallait que toute voiture automobile soit précédée d'un homme avec un drapeau rouge qui marchait devant pour dire que c'était dangereux. Et en fait, on s'est rendu compte ensuite que c'était le lobby des chevaux qui s'était arrangé pour essayer de slow down le développement de l'automobile. Mais je pense que le danger, c'est qu'on se trouve embarqué là-dedans. Donc, si la réglementation, elle est toujours en retard, comment est-ce qu'on compense ça? Alors, est-ce que c'est l'éthique qui vient le compenser? Est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose de self-regulation de la part des grandes plateformes, d'interaction? Amanda, je vois que vous levez la main générale.
Oui, juste rapidement, puis je donnerai la parole. Je crois que l'éthique doit être en amont de la réglementation. Donc oui, et surtout l'éthique nous inscrit dans des principes durables. Mais quand je dis 3-4 ans, la réglementation, enfin, vous connaissez la difficulté de mettre un certain nombre de pays d'accord sur des sujets. 3-4 ans, c'est déjà extrêmement court. Donc ce qui est vraiment important, c'est que dans cette réglementation, on ne soit pas trop attaché à des choses trop précises. parce que sinon il faudra les changer tout le temps. Il faut être capable d'avoir une réglementation un peu comme un code de la route. Si vous voulez que j'utilise ma voiture pour faire un déplacement familial, pour faire 500 km, pour faire 20 km, c'est le même code de la route. Il ne change pas en fonction de mon usage. Donc ça, c'est quelque chose qu'il va falloir aussi peut-être réviser, revoir, réfléchir par rapport à cette évolution-là. Mais 3-4 ans, ça paraît long à l'échelle de l'IA, c'est vrai. Mais à l'échelle de la réglementation, c'est extrêmement court, surtout au niveau européen, où on est un certain nombre de pays à devoir se mettre d'accord.
On a 27 pays à mettre d'accord, oui. Amanda, please.
So, excellent points. And I think one of the things I want to point out is we have in Texas created by statute an Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council. And I'm named by statute on that council. There's a member of our Senate, a member from our House of Representatives, and then other members from industry that are appointed to the council to talk about the use of AI in state government. And one of the things, and I really am interested in looking at the work in France, what they've done with the Code of Ethics, is we will be proposing a Code of Ethics. And I think the point is very well made that has to be the overarching framework for all of it. Because it's very difficult when we talk about regulation and you look at all the different sectors. If you had regulations that would cover health and then insurance and then government, you're not going to be able to do a one-size-fits-all. But with that ethical framework, and that's really what we're looking to do, I think that is something that is definitely more long-lasting. One other point I wanted to make about government and some of the unique challenges, and this is actually something that we've heard about through the testimony that came before our Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council, is one of the unique challenges in government, and you touched on this a little bit, John, when you were talking about like summarization and things like that, is we have specific sets of laws that govern our records. And so all of a sudden, and you're also right that AI has been deployed for a long time, and our agencies have been using it. But all of a sudden now, we have a technology that is summarizing meetings in real time. Meetings have never been summarized before. You turn on the dictation and you turn it on, and no one was taking notes in these meetings. And you're creating new drafts every time you enter a prompt, every time you do all these things. Those in Texas are subject to our records laws. And so now we have a technology that is creating mountains of new information, mountains of new data, all of which are subject to our records laws. And we have very, very strong transparency laws in Texas. So all of those records are now subject to our Public Information Act, and they can be requested by members of the public or the media. This is a whole new world that we really were not prepared for in looking at this. So there's certain acknowledgments now that agencies, before they deploy some of these technologies, that they have to assume that as a business risk. And the answer cannot be, I will say, I think that the vendor community is becoming more aware of this, because originally when I would raise these questions in meetings, the answer would be, well, you can just turn it off. You don't have to do that. Or you could say, not just turn it off, but it'll just disappear, that information. I'm like, no, that's a problem too. We have to keep the records by law. So it's just a little bit more of a unique challenge. Not one that's insurmountable, but it's just a little bit different when it comes to the government deployment of these technologies.
Absolutely, and we're seeing the same thing happen in the Canadian marketplace. Now, the question that I always pose is this an AI challenge or is this a data governance challenge? And we've been looking at data governance for years. This has been a crisis for all organizations. How many people label all their documentation within their organization? I'm pretty sure Simon's the only one that does that here, right? Like otherwise, people don't do that. And so, is that a transitory record? Have you defined what a transitory record is? Have you defined what an official record is? And so we're accounting data governance and we're trying to fix it with AI. And so let's be very, very careful about doing that. A couple of books that really have informed my view of how this world is evolving, and we talked about regulation and evolving it, and how do we get rid of the waving the red flag in front of the car rule as we move along. If you haven't read Recoding America by Jennifer Palka, it talks about how regulation has been informed almost like paint in an old house. Every new government comes in and makes their own changes to the regulations and legislation, so that we have these old rules that fit with maybe our pre-industrial time that fit today with our current rules. So we need a process by which we can remove those things that don't make sense anymore. Why do I mention that? We are reaching peak GPT. You talk to researchers around the world, they say that GPT-6 or GPT-7 or GPT-8 is not going to have the same impact that GPT-4 had over GPT-3, right? So that curve is dying off. We're going to have to find new ways to do business, right? There are going to be new models. And so how do we make sure that our regulation keeps pace with that? Especially if we come to quantum AI, which is 3 to 5 years away, right? So that's one of the challenges. We need to be able to sever stuff that doesn't make sense anymore. The second book that I encourage everybody to get is called Power and Prediction. And this is by 3 authors here in Canada from the Creative Destruction Lab, University of Toronto. And they talk about the evolution of general purpose technologies. And they propose this idea of point solutions, application solutions, and systemic change. Now, how many people have heard AI equated to the electrical revolution? I think many of us have, right? And electricity wanting to come in and starting off with lighting the streets as point solutions, and then moving to applications, replacing the steam engine, and then having a quiet period until there was systemic change, getting into the manufacturing line, miniaturization. Now we have electronics everywhere, right? The same thing I see happening in real time in AI. Point solutions, using AI to replace things like fraud detection, anti-money laundering, human trafficking. Very simple, not a lot of rules. Application solutions, all these co-pilots, being able to come in, automate things, but very little rules. We're going to see systemic change happen through the marketplace as these ripple effects occur, because we need every participant in the supply chain to be AI enabled. So if I'm a restaurateur and I'm predicting how many avocados I want to use, and yes, I stole that from the book, then I have to make sure my supplier has AI to know how many to provide me. And that supplier needs to know the shipper, and they need to know, and then it goes all the way through to the grower. And so we're going to see big systematic changes throughout the marketplace that then go through all our rules. And so how do we review all our rules to make sure that they're AI enabled so that we can really seize the value of this in a secure and trusted way?
So I think you have, well, you could say you have legacy modernization that was brought to you by COVID and the pandemic, and now we'll have data governance brought to us by AI. Okay.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, it seems we just have 10 more minutes. So we're supposed to speak about the roles and responsibilities of private, public sector, lawmakers, and we see that even having the best regulation possible doesn't mean that we will have fair players. So that's also where ethics has a role to play. And we see that there's a tension between ethics and law, because law is compulsory and you can go to jail. Ethics, as you said, General, time to time seems to be a little bit softer. So how, the 4 of you, how do you see the responsibility for each of your institution if something goes drastically wrong, I would say? This is a tricky question, I know.
So is this the blaming game one?
No, that's just a way to send a tricky
We're going to blame it on Microsoft.
Yeah, now you can fight. Okay.
Go ahead, John.
Well, let me start off with this is a shared responsibility, and this is a shared global responsibility. Right, and so you'll see many companies here in the show floor and in the Western world say we want to play by the rules. We have a code of ethics, we have guidance. We're working with government to develop a regulation. But if we talk about trust and security, we know that the bad actors don't follow the same rules. And so we are encouraging global regulation. Think of it as the global Geneva Convention for cyberspace, so that we make sure that, hey, we're not getting misinformation, disinformation, manipulation from other people. So that we do have a firm corner in regulation. This is a shared responsibility, however. Think of it much like in security. If you're using an application like, I'll call out Microsoft 365, a lot of the security is on our backs for that one. But if you're building your own infrastructure as a service in the cloud, you have a lot of responsibility yourself. Likewise with AI. You don't have a lot of responsibility to build in the fairness checker and translator. But if you're rolling your own co-pilot, your own chatbot, then you have something that you need to do there. If you're doing your own medical diagnosis on your own data sets, then you have a far more lift. And so we need to be able to accurately define all the participants in this community and their responsibilities. The NIST AI Risk Management Framework goes a great way to define that. There's a whole appendix that describes all those different actors and their roles and responsibilities. You need to rely upon your vendors to sign up to some of these requirements as well. And so we're starting to see requests for proposals and other terms and conditions help then enforce that for organizations and make sure that there's a commitment to only use these tools in responsible ways.
So I'll be really quick, so we can all have a chat. So I agree. It's going to be a cooperative effort. It's going to be mutual across the board. But from the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, I'll tell you threats to AI. I'll tell you about threats from AI because we have that privilege of working within an intelligence agency. But just think back when cloud was the big topic, okay? Everybody wanted to get into the cloud, and we don't even speak about cloud anymore. But what we did was we put guardrails on cloud, and those guardrails work quite effectively. We're working on guardrails for AI, so that'll be our role in that space so that we can make sure that AI is trustworthy.
Alors moi je vais être très long parce que je pense qu'on se promet à on se prépare à des procès extrêmement longs. Parce qu'effectivement, il va falloir dégager les responsabilités des uns et des autres. Ce sera quelque chose d'extrêmement compliqué. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, moi, je suis plutôt contre l'idée que la machine soit responsable de quoi que ce soit. Déjà, que la responsabilité soit humaine, soit sur la personnalité morale qu'on a en France, c'est-à-dire une entreprise peut être responsable, effectivement, de dégâts causés par le système qui a été mis en place. Je vous invite à aller voir la réglementation européenne sur l'IA, puisqu'elle classe les déployeurs des systèmes d'IA, elle classe les fournisseurs des systèmes d'IA et elle leur impose un certain nombre de conduites à tenir, notamment sur les systèmes qu'on classe à haut risque. Eh bien, si ces conditions ne sont pas respectées, leur responsabilité pourra être engagée. Si nous, gendarmes, on ne respecte pas nos conditions de fournisseurs quand on développe, de déployeurs quand on déploie des systèmes d'intelligence artificielle, la gendarmerie pourra effectivement être mise en cause. Après, pourquoi je ne suis pas attaché à la personnalité juridique d'une machine? Je pense qu'il faut qu'en droit pénal, il faut qu'il y ait une intention morale à la réalisation d'une infraction. Et je pense que si on commence à aller dans ces sujets-là, il y a des gens qui défendent l'idée d'une personnalité juridique pour la machine. Je crois qu'on commence à admettre qu'il y a une conscience dans la machine. Et je ne crois pas du tout à cette idée de conscience dans la machine. On pourra simuler des consciences, on pourra imiter des consciences, mais je ne crois pas à une réelle conscience des machines. Donc je crois que mais vous savez, ces notions de responsabilité, elles sont déjà existantes. Hein, quand vous avez un crash aérien, quand vous avez un certain nombre d'accidents, on cherche la compagnie, on cherche le pilote, on cherche le sous-traitant de la maintenance. Donc on cherche déjà un partage des responsabilités, engageant soit les personnes, les individus, soit les personnalités morales. Donc on aura des débats de ce type-là. Moi je ne crois pas du tout à la notion d'aller condamner le développeur. Vous savez, le développeur, il reste dans une entreprise. Et ça veut dire qu'il faut avoir un cadre éthique, un cadre réglementaire dans son entreprise sur ce que peuvent faire les développeurs. Et les développeurs doivent respecter ce cadre réglementaire. S'ils sont en faute, c'est par rapport au cadre réglementaire de l'entreprise. Donc là, ils pourraient porter une responsabilité. Mais l'entreprise a la responsabilité de surveiller son employé également, en tout cas de le contrôler dans les process qu'il réalise. Donc je pense que ces responsabilités doivent être de ce niveau-là, personnalité morale, ou s'il y a une intention malveillante, on arrive sur l'individu.
Oui, mais c'est vrai, des crashs aériens, heureusement, on n'en a pas tous les jours. Des difficultés techniques, on risque d'en rencontrer pas mal. Et donc, effectivement, je pense que ça risque de devenir assez complexe.
Juste peut-être, Eric, si vous permettez, quand vous avez un accident avec votre GPS, personne ne va chercher la responsabilité du GPS. Pourtant, c'est le GPS qui vous a conduit. Mais on dit que l'humain a eu la décision parce qu'il a choisi son GPS. Vous voyez, on ne se pose pas toujours la question de la responsabilité.
That's an interesting analogy. So we just have a few minutes, so it's really time to wrap up. Perhaps the final words for Amanda.
Well, one thing I would point out as part of the conversation, and this goes back to the improvements that we're seeing for data governance that will come naturally from deployment of AI. But I also love that we're having conversations around bias because bias is a very human thing, and the machine, it's just an algorithm, and it's just learning from the human behavior and the human data, and so that we're actually having conversations about this. And if it took AI to be able to have conversations about natural human biases that came from very important decisions that were life impacting for our residents, then that's a good thing. But I think at the end of the day around this, what we're going to focus on, and I think what's really important, is transparency. Transparency when artificial intelligence is being used to, frankly, anytime. Whether it's an image generation, if it's a voice simulation, if it's making a decision that would impact any of Texans in their life, in their pursuit of liberties or services or anything else that they would get from the government. So I think transparency and then redress. The ability to be able to correct misinformation, to correct information that's wrong, and to have some sort of appeal process from any of these things. I think that all goes back to education as well, is educating the public as well as our workforce.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you for the four of us. Yeah, I think you deserve a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Alors, merci à tous. Je ne sais pas s'il y en a qui auraient voulu poser des questions. Donc, on a eu un beau panel très riche en informations. S'il y en a qui désirent poser des questions à un des membres du panel, je vous invite à venir au micro au centre de la salle. On va prendre quelques instants. On a le temps pour au moins 2 questions. Est-ce qu'il y en a? À vous l'honneur. En français ou en anglais, comme vous voulez. Dans le micro, par contre.
Hi, I'm going to be speaking in English.
Perfect.
My French is not all that good. I'm a master's student in cybersecurity at Concordia with an interest in GRC, and DevSecOps. So my question is to the whole panel. With 1,600 AI-related policies worldwide, quantum computing on the horizon, and tech crossing borders, especially in developing countries, which are primed for positive disruption, what challenges do you anticipate in maintaining positive AI disruption, consistent ethical AI standards worldwide, and specifically in those developing countries?
Who wants to be first?
So there's a number of challenges that are there. One is, I think, access to the technology and access to the experts. I was sharing as we were preparing for our session that there was an AI conference held in Vancouver just before COVID hit. And the leading researchers from the southern globe weren't given visas to come in and talk about their AI expertise because the Canadian government was afraid that those experts would stay in Vancouver. And so we need to have open dialogue and open conversation and really adapt this idea of not for us, without us, and have that conversation. There's a need to be able to represent those communities in these large language models. And so how do we do that? In Canada, I've often mused about this idea of what happens if I'm a member of the Métis community and I want to learn about my history through the eyes of my elders. Is there enough content there? And have we built systems to be able to put that into the right system? We see a broad range in the technology realm of having now multiple agents answer questions. And so there's a premise that you might have a CFO, a chief operating officer, chief marketing officer, all answer. But what if you put that into having a Canadian large language model, a US large language model, a European Union large language model to help you advise? What if nobody asks the Canadian large language model? Right? Do we build a large language model, or do we help inform the international large language models? That's an open question, but we need to have that dialogue, and so we need to be open for that conversation with these experts.
Well, one thing I would say that I also heard from your question is the challenge of a patchwork of regulations across the globe, and that's a very real challenge. I mean, it really is, I think, particularly for anyone with a product that they want to be able to market, globally or even in multiple countries. So I think there's a place to get there. I think some of it comes from, again, when we have ethical frameworks that are going to be very similar. I really imagine that they would be. And so if there's not over-regulation, but more of the frameworks and guardrails, one thing I can give an example for in Texas is we have something called TexRamp, which is the Texas Risk Authorization and Management Program for cloud products and services. And you have to have a TexRAMP certification if you want to market a cloud product or service to our state agencies or higher education institutions. There's also FedRAMP at the national level in Texas, and there's a state ramp as well. So one of the things we tried to do to help to avoid that patchwork of regulation is we worked with the state ramp organization and with FedRAMP as well to come up with at least a common set of standards to make it a little bit more streamlined and to try to get to a place where you could have products that were quickly and predictably certified across all three platforms. So I would think as more and more countries come out with different sorts of frameworks and guidelines, I would think that the market can definitely encourage those organizations and to come together with more of a common framework to help business move along.